recessions predictable? We all know that predictions and forecasting are very familiar, especially to financial analysts, especially since one of the roles of a financial analysts is to make well-informed decisions on the basis, of course, of past information. How can you use your knowledge and your skills to thrive in a recession, or better still, be able to know what are some of the telltale signs of a recession before it actually happens. Kihanda, as I mentioned, some serious names, and we are privileged. That is the ICIFA Vice Chairman and CEO at ICA Lion Asset Management, FA Eric Musau. Eric Musau is the Executive Director Research at Standard Investment Bank. Mr. Socrates Majune, another interesting name. He's an economist and has provided consulting services for several organizations, including the World Bank.
Other people who were key in this school were David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, and a lot of these people, with regards to our topic of today, they believed in what is called the Say's law. Say's law basically means that you believe that supply creates its own demand. If a product is produced, it will have some market somewhere. So at the end of the day, for them, they believe that there could be some fluctuations in the economy, but it is not something that will stay for a long time. So in short, something like a recession is not something that they'd foreseen. And this depression occurred between 1929 to 1940, which means it just stayed a little bit long up to almost when the Second World War was beginning. And this is how the Great Depression actually started. And so to explain it, we see that before the 1929, most of the 1920s, economies were having booms, which means the economies were growing. Unemployment was not a big problem. Almost everything was just doing quite fine. And this could also be seen as things through the fall in agricultural prices. But towards the end of 1929, around 24th of October, we started to see some problems in economies. So for them, they totally believe that you need to target this G that is here. So this is just the basic macroeconomics. So the Y is GDP, C is consumption, I investment, and then G is government.
One of the key things that is included is really assumptions. So the assumptions you make are really a key ingredient as to what outcome you're going to have and how accurate it could be. The importance of data in all this is quite critical. So especially in a recession, there's a tendency of having historical data, and that's what you run to be able to sort of predict. When you ask whether recessions are predictable, I think you have to look at, the different economies who've tried, and there've been different, types of ways of coming up with predictions, and it's been very difficult. I know now in the US now they're saying Sam Rule is now, Claudia Sam is now a lady. She's the one who's come up probably with the latest ways of trying to predict a recession.
I think the recession is about at least having 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, while a depression, of course, is much longer. Certainly, we are facing a recession, and I think the prediction and projection by the IMF is that in the next year, at least for this year, we'll actually have a contraction by 3%, and likely bounce back next year by about 5%. So I would say for now we are talking about a recession because we don't foresee. It's still early days, so we are yet to see the impact of that. But I think in terms of recovery, I think a lot has to do with the measures that the government is going to do in terms of easing of the restrictions that have taken place. We've seen the hotels, having faced controls being put in place. We've had, across the world, airlines starting to slowly resume operations. But there's also a balance that we also need to maintain, because going back to history, we also see that there were situations of second waves of infections. I think I saw a story in South Korea where they had to, they opened schools and then they had to close them back again because of the impact of the second wave of infection. So I think the recovery also has to do with maintaining that balance. So,
it's a U-shaped. We are likely to, V-shaped. It's likely to recover very quickly.
How exactly the government has put in some measures to make sure that it's cushioning, especially people towards still having access to cash, which I think might not affect saving that much, especially from our perspective. Our reaction has been good, both from the monetary perspective. The number one telltale sign is the GDP. If you are not growing that well, then there's a problem, and that could be one of the telltale signs. And if especially the GDP, the decline in the GDP is something that is consistent. Another telltale sign could be, especially with regards to unemployment. So especially when you look at unemployment and it is persisting over time, it should be something that is really, really worrying, especially to any person, because those are the signs that the other economists have portrayed, especially with regards to the recessions and the depressions.
And when you look at some of the other measures in terms of just the other policy measures and the outlook, it didn't really look like there was a good way of predicting recessions per se. I think the idea is to be able to get real-time data. That seemed to be a little bit more realistic. Get real-time data, how to interpret that data. So I think there's that component, and I think even policymakers is just to be able to try and have that. I think it's something that will continue to grapple. People will continue grappling with it for quite a while, and I think this pandemic will probably provide new research around how do you look at such issues. So my sense is that it will not be easy. At the end of the day, it's just to be as prepared as possible.
What are the investment opportunities you can elaborate on for SMEs, both the SMEs and the households?
I think for SMEs, what comes to mind, for instance, is technology. One of the things that has become very clear in this whole coronavirus situation is the fact that technology will continue to be a very important part of what we do. So one, the issue of social distance. You will see a lot of SMEs. One opportunity I see, of course, is in delivery, whether it is food or physical delivery of stuff. I think that is something that has increased significantly because I know many supermarket chains, for instance, now have a service, that they can deliver your products to your home.
We need to be able to know how to allocate our resources appropriately within Kenya. If interest rates were lower, I think there's ample ways of using the money appropriately and to be able to generate growth. I mean, that's why if you imagine China, coming to set up, do a lot of constructions, for most of Africa actually. But it's because maybe if they did that construction in their country, they would really not have maybe people to live in them and so forth. So I think there's room to allocate money appropriately within Kenya if interest rates were lower, and I think we've seen the interest rate cut. If you look at some of the defaults we've had, it's not, you could say the bulk of them, probably 80% are from big business.
I think the lesson that we've learned is we should always have enough resources to be able to deal with such situations. The massive economic stimulus you have seen in the more developed world is because through their prudent financial management, they have been able to accumulate sufficient resources to enable the government to intervene in such situations. So I think for us, we also need to be prepared. There are important lessons that we survived, and I think Socrates covered it well. We survived the global financial crisis because at that time there was that terminology of decoupling. We were not very significantly linked to the global economy.
But once again, we appreciate your company and we look forward to your engagement in other webinars coming up. As you have seen and we have circulated to our members, we now have a schedule of webinars coming up to September, and that is at least once every month. But there are others coming up during the month. Some are in collaboration with some of our partners. So we look forward to your participation in upcoming events. And we wish you a good night and stay safe. We are still at unprecedented times, but we believe that we need to still remain hopeful and to look forward to better days, because hope is the only thing that can carry us forward. And we also need to lend a hand where we can, help your neighbor. And even as professionals, please sensitize people regarding investments, of how to make better investment decisions. Sometimes it can be difficult if you're living from hand to mouth, but we can be able to advise and engage and also play our role as investment and financial analysts. For our guests, this is ICIFA, the Institute of Certified Investment and Financial Analysts. You can go to www.icifa.co.ke to get more information about the Institute.